Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of St. Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Dr. Carrie Gress. She's a Catholic wife and mother. She holds a doctorate in philosophy from Catholic University of America. She's also a scholar at the Institute for Human Ecology at CUA. She's the founder and editor of the online women's magazine, theologyofhome.com, and an author of books, including The Anti-Mary Exposed, The End of Woman, and her new book, which is her 11th book. And the topic of our discussion today, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. It's published by Sophia Institute Press, sophiainstitute.com. And we also recommend your local Catholic bookstore. Find it there as well. You can also learn more about Dr. Gress and her good work over at her website, carriegress.com. Dr. Gress, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
A great blessing to have you here with us. And so from the introduction of the book, it reads that this book takes a big picture look at the ideological terrain that has infected the way women and men have come to view the world, the family, fertility, and faith because of the distortions of the feminist ideology. It is also a clear-eyed and hopeful look at how we can build it back. End of quote. So we're going to try our best to cover that scope today and get as much in as possible. But Dr. Gress, off the top, what are the most important facts to know about the roots and the nature of the feminist movement?
Well, I think the best place to start is to really just recognize that pretty much everything we think we know about feminism is actually wrong. It's just incredible how much has been glossed over and how much feminism has been made to look as just this very fruitful Christian vision that, some early women in the 1800s wanted just to get the women the right to vote, and that it's really been just, positive for women. And I think that's, from my research, what I discovered is there could be nothing further from the truth. These women weren't actually Christian. They actually saw Christianity as the enemy, and that it was a tool used by men to enslave women. And, from there, things just continue to unravel, especially as the second, third, and fourth waves also develop over time. So I think that's probably the best place, is just to sort of ask your audience to just put away all those preconceived notions that you have of feminism and, take a totally different look at it and see what those feminist women were actually really promoting, which is not at all compatible with Christianity.
Yes, and you even write about how most of the first wave founders of feminism were involved in various occult activities. Can you lay out some of the facts on this for us?
So of the top leaders of feminism, starting with with Mary Wollstonecraft, going through a bunch of different names of people that you might recognize: Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone. There's not a single one of them that actually remained a mainline Protestant or Catholic. They all ended up becoming either a Unitarian, which means that they don't believe in the divinity of Christ. They just believe that there's one God, there's no Trinity, or some kind of spiritualist, which is what Elizabeth Cady Stanton did. She dabbled in Unitarianism as well as the occult. Her idea for the Seneca Falls Convention actually came from a spirit table, which was part of this whole spiritualism with spirits knocking on a table to give you information. Matilda Gage is a name that very few people have heard, but she was very deeply involved with Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony from the beginning. And then she ended up leaving them when they struck a deal with the temperance movement, because she thought, all these women are Christians. I hate Christians. I don't want anything to do with Christians, was sort of her stance. And she was deeply involved in witchcraft. So she went her own way and then left her own mark on the world by influencing her daughter and son-in-law in witchcraft. And it was actually her son-in-law, L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wicked Wizard of Oz, or The Wizard of Oz. So it's really interesting to see how she left her imprint on. And if you look at The Wizard of Oz, you can see there's, good witchcraft, bad witchcraft, and then there's what's supposed to be the emblem of the patriarchy, the wizard, who really has no power once you sort of expose his weakness. and that all came from what's called the women's movement. And we actually I was able to find for this book a number of documents from different bishops and cardinals even speaking out against this because of the fact that it was so denigrating motherhood and really prioritizing the idea of the masculine in women. So, again, we tend to think the first wave is some sort of nice suffrage movement with a bunch of Christian women, but the details are much more harrowing, I think.
Yes, yeah, very important facts to make known. Very glad that Dr. Carrie Gress is with us to share some of this, but there's no replacing reading the book in its entirety. It's called Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. Again, you can get it at sophiainstitute.com. Dr. Gress, you write in the introduction that the new slavery that feminism wrought is the crisis of use and disposal. Most people believe these societal scourges were simply the result of the sexual revolution, not realizing that the vision, ideas, and execution of the sexual revolution were loaded decades before by feminism's first wave, all of which begs the question, did feminist women like Gage, Stanton, Anthony, and the others who came after them do something truly good for women in society, or, despite what may have been the best of intentions, was it something else? End of quote. So clearly it was something else. It resulted in something wicked. How has it been bad for women? How can you lay this out for someone who maybe isn't quite seeing it?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question, again, because we've been told that feminism really is just about jobs, it's about voting, it's about education. But one of the things that you have to understand is that the first feminist wave was really piggybacking on the idea of abolition and of slavery. And so that it's almost kind of audacious when you actually look at the data, because of the fact that these are some of the wealthiest women in elite circles in the United States and in Europe. And they have the audacity to say that they are somehow suffering the way that slaves are, who are brought on these slave ships and chains. And that's really the start of it, is that they're trying to make themselves form this narrative that somehow this is really, this kind of slavery that they're living with. The other thing that's really important to note too is that there's Mary Wollstonecraft, when she first is focused on this idea of, as proto-feminism, what kicked feminism off, was trying to help women that were in these desperate situations. And we all, can think of horrible stories of women being abused and mistreated. But the problem is that feminism actually hasn't solved that problem. There was a book I found written in 1909 where the author said, all the things that Mary Wollstonecraft wanted to correct still have yet to be corrected. And pushing women to become more masculine hasn't protected us from that. The only thing that really has the capacity to protect us is really the transformation of culture through Christianity. That's really what's allowed women to really flourish to begin with. But then, fast forward another 100 years and you look at what's happened with women. Not only can we not protect women from violence and abuse, it's just through the roof. We have new scourges, things like human trafficking, which we certainly didn't grow up with. These are new realities that have come from the sexual revolution, and the sexual revolution actually came from a lot of feminist and Marxist ideas. So I think it's important to really understand. Absolutely, there could have been things that were done on a political or a legal basis that could have helped women, but the things that feminism is asking for, for women to be honored and their dignity to be upheld, and their lives to really, have value and to have that be seen, that can only happen with a certain shift in conversion, in heart, through Christianity. And that's, the problem is we're not actually seeing those fruits. And of course, the litany goes on of, well, if we just had a different kind of feminism, we could get there. And I think we've processed through how many different kinds of feminism at this point, and are still not quite getting to the answer. And part of the problem is just the inherent belief that women are somehow victims and men are the victimizer. And until we get that out of the culture, we're really not going to be able to create a kind of healing and flourishing that is going to help both men, women, and children, and the family to really flourish.
Yeah, you stated plainly, feminism is incompatible with Christianity. Rather, feminism has been responsible for much of the decay of the Christian West over the last 2 centuries. You compare feminism to a shadow church. Share with us more on this.
Yeah, so this idea of the shadow church actually came to me when I was looking at kind of the, processing the whole vision of feminism and the movement of a whole. And what are the core tenets? And I started to notice that, it has an object of worship. So there's an idol, which is female autonomy. And then it has these other pieces that I realized, one set is like commandments, another set is like theological virtues. So instead of faith, hope, and love, feminism promotes rage, contempt, and envy. There's a sacrament, which of course I think, most of your audience has probably heard Peter Crave talk about abortion being the sacrament of the left. But this is a very clear element and part of the feminist movement. It's got its own kind of evangelization as well, which is both it's propagated both because of the fact that broken women break other women. And then, of course, it's also propagated by just an incredible amount of very active and energized celebrities, influencers, media elites, all of those kinds of magazines. All of these things have actually worked very intentionally to try to promote feminism across the board and throughout the culture.
Fascinating. We've got Dr. Carrie Gress with us again. The book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, published by Sophia Institute Press, sophiainstitute.com. We're going to be right back with Dr. Gress in just a moment. But I hope that this is enlightening for you to whatever degree it needs to be. Wherever you're at, however this is hitting you, perhaps this is all brand new. But most likely, you are somebody who likely knows that feminism is no good. But maybe, like me, you kind of grew up being given this sense handed to you that, well, there's a feminism and then there's a radical feminism. So there's kind of this bad radical feminism, but then there's kind of this good feminism. Well, the facts are very different once you get into them. We're going to be right back with more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Carrie Gress, and her book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. SophiaInstitute.com is where you can find it. You can also go to Dr. Gress's website to learn more about her and her good work, carriegress.com. But I do want to get back to some ways that feminism mimics Christianity in just a moment. But first, it did catch my attention a few years ago when Sue Ellen Browder, who I've interviewed multiple times, wrote an article on your work in which she stated the following. Several years ago, Carrie Gress and I had a brief but memorable conversation about feminism. She was working at that time on her book, The Anti-Mary, Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. I was writing a book, Sex and the Catholic Feminist, in which I hoped to spread the truth about how the abortion right got inserted into the women's movement. I told her I thought that to get the pro-life message into the mainstream media, we as Catholics needed to reclaim the F word, feminism. As kindly as she could, Gress replied, "It can't be done." Now that I have read Gress's profound, thoughtful new book, The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us, I'm here to report she was right and I was wrong. Feminism, which has become an all-embracing, self-worshipping religion with satanic overtones, is so rotten at its foundations that anyone who hopes to promote justice for women, save the family, and renew Christian worship must have nothing more to do with it. End of quote. So a couple things caught my attention there. First, Sue Ellen Browder being a sort of a whistleblower of the feminist movement, being entrenched in it, pushing it as a writer of Cosmopolitan for decades. And at the same time, just the openness that she had to actually considering what you were sharing with her, and then to read your work and then to receive it and say, yeah, she's right, and to really get it and then to adjust accordingly. I think that's a wonderful example. My guess is not everybody is receiving your work so well, but what an example for the right way to really encounter what you've put forth for us. Anything else you want to share with us just on kind of the what you're seeing on people sort of waking up to what you're sharing with them more and more?
Yeah, no, I think Sue Ellen is obviously a great model. We were really, struggling with these questions together. And so it's, it's just really beautiful to see her humility and her capacity to follow the truth wherever it takes us. But yeah, I've been writing about this now for about 10 years. And initially, when I wrote The Anti-Mary Exposed, I had no idea that the first wave was really as corrupt as it was, because, I'd been assured by scholars and experts that it was really good. And it wasn't actually until I wrote my previous book that I started digging into it and realizing, like, there's some deep problems here. I had actually scheduled 2 days to work on the first wave women, thinking, okay, I'll just find some nice quotes and then I can move on. And I'm actually still working on first wave women. There's still just so much to research, and so many different rabbit holes of things that I'm still shocked to find. So yeah, I think that's changed, but the culture has changed significantly as well as I've been publishing these books. And I think now we've gotten to the point, especially with the news cycle the way that it is, people are really seeing that something is off with women, that we've got some deep problems now that we're, second, third generation of feminism, and that the damage isn't just to one generation of women. It's, it's being passed down. And so I think that there's a real openness to it in a way that was not there even 2 years ago, when my last book, The End of Woman, came out. So I think that's a really hopeful direction in which we're going. The other thing I'm also seeing is that among young people, it's much easier to have a conversation about this. My own generation, Gen Xers and Boomers, it's a lot harder, because I think it was fed to us with our mother's milk. We were born and raised. So it's a much harder thing to get people to think about it differently. But I think it's slowly happening.
Yeah, excellent. And to just remind people, the stakes in all of this are so massive. You write the following to help us be oriented to what we're talking about here. The reason feminism and its harmful fruit remain so impervious is that we haven't grappled with or even acknowledged that feminism for most Western women has supplanted Christianity as a moral guide. We have fundamentally underestimated how deeply feminism has formed or deformed the female heart in Western culture because of the religious character it has adopted. So this is extremely powerful for us to see it, because there's hope in really seeing it to its depth. We can really understand what we are up against here, what the ramifications are, what has happened, and then get to a good diagnosis and a good plan of remedy. And you give us a lot of hope in the book about how to move forward through this. We'll get to some of that a bit later. But first, what are some of the ways that feminism mimics Christianity?
Yeah, well, like I said, there's an object of worship, which is the idol of female autonomy. That's really the goal that is promoted in feminism, kind of this bubble wrapping of women to try to protect us from any kind of emotional suffering and to just focus on ourselves and our career. And then behind that, you've got the three commandments, which these ideas came together in the early 1800s. And I've just watched them through the literature sort of swirl and pop up in different ways. And as soon as I say what they are, you'll be able to see them mapped on to specifically young women in our culture today. But the first one is contempt for men. The second one is promiscuity. And the third one is involvement with the occult. And the occult, of course, hides itself well. It's, the movie Wicked and witchcraft are certainly popular now. Horoscopes, manifesting, tarot cards, all of those things are incredibly popular among young women. So all of that are kind of the commandments, the what it is that women ought to do in addition to this autonomy. The other important piece is the right, the RITE, which is work. Work is really important because without a job, you cannot be an autonomous female. So that's another important piece. The theological virtues, I think, is one too, that once you see it, you can't really unsee it. Instead of faith, hope, and love, it's rage, contempt, and envy. And this again goes back to the 1890s as well. The socialists realized that if you had women who were angry, they were going to be a lot more politically active than if women aren't angry. And so this is where the idea of consciousness raising was it really got its start. And it became very popular in China, and then it came back to the United States around the 60s and 70s, and everybody thought it was this exotic thing from China, when in fact it was probably just, the socialists in New York City who came up with the idea. But, this moves on even to every year in March, we still celebrate, so to speak, the International Day of Women. And that was really from the communists in the 1920s who were really recording the feminists because they saw that they were this angry band of women, that they wanted to be just another layer of the Soviet revolution, the communist revolution that they were working on. And so they really courted them. And that's, one of the reasons why that so-called holiday is still celebrated today. So you can see just even in those few things, it tells women how to work. What to do, how to behave, and how to think and how to feel. So it hems women in very explicitly with these kinds of religious morals or ethos with which to work. And then, of course, there's the abortion issue, which is this real sacrament. Because abortion it becomes sacred, because if a woman is unable to terminate a pregnancy that comes because of her promiscuity, then that will really impinge upon her capacity to work and be autonomous and become more, behave much more like a man, and not even a good man at that. So that's why it becomes important. And this is, Peter Crave talks a lot about, reflects on the idea that in the Eucharist, we have Christ saying, "This is my body offered up for you." And abortion really turns that on its head. And it's a mother saying to her child, "This is your body offered up for me." And it takes on this real sacredness, again, because of the fact that it's really in service to the idol of female autonomy. So those are all, I think those elements are part of it. And then, of course, just the element of evangelization is really key, too, because women have a way of trying to keep other women in check. This is one of the things I come up against a lot, is just, how can you dare, how can you think these things? This is not what women are supposed to think about themselves and about feminism. And it's this sense of kind of not staying with the club, not going with a group, not being part of that group think. And we see this as a virtue, I think, with the fashion industry and in different kinds of fashionable ways. But we don't realize how much the fashion of ideas really affects us and forms the way that we think about things. And I think that's one of the ways in which this sort of feminist evangelization also is highly effective, by just other women sort of checking other women who might be questioning whether or not it's actually good for women or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dr. Carrie Gress is with us. Her book, Something Wicked, sophiainstitute.com. Yeah, you write in here some about the reaction or the response of men to all of this, and how it's been quite weak. In some ways, they just don't want to argue with women, I guess. But I think when you look at what you mentioned, how feminism fuels abortion, and when you look at what the reality of abortion is, this ongoing daily mass murder of our preborn children that we're living in the midst of now for over 50 years in this country, and countless numbers around the world. It's really unbelievable, that reality, and to think that men have kind of stood by and allowed all of this to happen. It seems quite common sense. How could something be more obvious, obviously wrong and obviously harmful to a woman than her turning her heart against her own child, and so much so that she would harm the child, even kill the child? It just seems obvious. And so for men to have remained on the sidelines and allowed themselves to be pushed there, but then to stay there passively as all of this is going on, it just seems almost unbelievable that this has been the reality for all of these decades. Anything you can say to sort of help us to understand that more?
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting is that feminism has this incredible capacity to defend itself so that it will not have any kind of scrutiny or criticism. And one of the ways it does that is by telling men you can't talk about it because you're not a woman. It also has this veneer, again, like we mentioned earlier, about looking like it's just there to help women. And I think men very earnestly have wanted to help women and do what women wanted. I think that they, don't realize just how off the direction is. The third thing that they say to, women like me is you can't talk about this because you have gotten a PhD and therefore you benefited from feminism, so you're not allowed to talk about it either. So it has these ways in which it protects itself, and so nobody wants to really brush up against that or push back on that. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing is sort of this rise of the manosphere, which has certainly some good parts to it, but it's also got some really corrupt parts that are actually mirroring radical feminism. So radical feminists can have a deep contempt for men, and I think some of the more aggressive and disordered kinds of the manosphere have a deep contempt for women, and it's just sort of this back and forth, a very adolescent kind of war. But that's obviously not going to bring any kind of deep healing. I think the other thing that we've been unaware of, and we haven't actually even talked about as pro-lifers in general, is just the role that feminism has played as the engine of abortion. I think we've looked for all kinds of alternatives to heal and to bring it to an end, but until we really get to the source of it, we are not going to be able to end abortion in the West.
We got to get to it, and the work of Dr. Carrie Gress is helping us to open our eyes to see it as it really is, to understand reality, and then, yes, to take responsibility, to repent of what we've done, what we haven't done, make a new resolve to do more, to do better. Some reparation is good. We need to repair the damage that has been done in this nation. We've got a lot of work to do, and there's only one way to do it, is to put Christ at the very center. Right? Everything that's being opposed here is actually the answer. It's Jesus at the center. We're going to get back with Dr. Gress in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Carrie Gress, talking about her book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. Highly recommend it. You can get it at sophiainstitute.com. Wherever you find books, support your local Catholic bookstore if you can. But again, you can get it at sophiainstitute.com as well. And I do want to go to a clip here. I noticed this from Tucker Carlson sometime earlier this week. I came across this and thought, hey, this would be a great thing to bring into the show and have Dr. Gress comment on. There's a lot here, but I'd be interested to hear your response to it. Here it is.
And destroying the relationship between men and women has been a huge part of that. How did they do that? By convincing them they don't need each other. And men and women are organically, naturally part of a whole, but only when they fit together. And everyone's like, oh, it's feminism. Well, what about feminism? Nothing with wages or rights or even abortion. It was the idea that women don't need men. In every society in America, every component of American society, every power center swung in behind that idea. And now we're at the kind of the terminus of that, where men and women, young men and young women, have been told they don't need each other, they don't understand each other, they don't have contact with each other, and therefore they hate each other. And boy, do they hate each other. It's absolutely the saddest thing going on in our country. Not all of these are gross generalizations, but if you're wondering why they're not getting married, it's because they can't even have a conversation. There's so much suspicion and resentment. And I could go through what they each seem to think about each other, but I won't. It's too awful. But they have the worst suspicions of each other. And some of those are rooted in truth. Of course, men and women are so different. Of course, they're suspicious of each other. The process of marriage is the process of becoming one flesh, and it's a very bumpy road. It takes a long time for the edges to wear off and for the two pieces to fit together snugly, but it happens. Mm-hmm. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. It's the most beautiful thing that could ever happen to you. It's literally the greatest thing in your life, and every good thing in your life comes from that marriage. Yeah. But I'll just be a lot more precise if I can get one more sentence, which is, the key to a happy family, in my opinion, and I know I'm going to be even more hated than I already am for saying this, there are many components to a happy family, to happy children, to getting to like a Christmas dinner where everyone's loving each other. But the single most important ingredient is the respect of a wife for her husband. Men are required to love their wives. Wives are required to respect their husbands. This is biblical, but it's also natural. Every person understands this on an intuitive level. It's the respect for the husband that's the hardest. And it's a combination of a wife's willingness to do it and a man's worthiness of it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great
very
statement.
Complex, difficult thing to achieve. But if you have that, if you have a family in which the wife respects her husband, you will have a happy marriage And if you have a happy marriage, you will have happy children.
Yeah.
The way to get to a happy family, happy children, happy marriage.
Yeah.
All right, that was Tucker Carlson from, I saw it earlier this week. I think it's from about 9 days ago. But Dr. Gress, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think he's absolutely right. I mean, this is, again, back to that idea that the goal of feminism has been female autonomy. So to break off faith, break off husbands, children, or even our fertility. Women are, constantly at war with their own fertility and their own bodies. And then we see that in the fullness of actually, hacking body parts off with the trans movement. So I think it really is feminism that has created this issue and this tension and this constant battle between men and women, and this incapacity to actually even see the complementarity, to see the goodness that men have and can bring to the table. And, so much of it is tragic because of the fact that a lot of the women that were in the women's movement, feminist movement, were actually very broken women. And so the real tragedy is for them to, instead of saying, okay, how do we correct this? How do we bring back something that's whole and healthy? The reaction is, no, let's just keep getting more liberal. Let's keep getting deeper and deeper, or further and further away from that which will actually bring healing and wholeness, which is, the complementarity of the sexes and ordered within the family and whatnot. So yeah, I think he's definitely onto something and right about that, in terms of that division that we're seeing, and again exacerbated by third or fourth generation, the hookup culture, all of these different ways in which we've told people to use and abuse one another. Not surprisingly, it's not creating warm emotions and deep bonds in people. I think it's incredibly tragic, especially when you see the way in which women have the capacity to be really the incredible glue of a culture, the glue of our families, the glue of a parish and a parish community, the way in which women are watching out for those on the perimeter, whether it's neighbors or the elderly or extended family. All of these things are being lost. And again, it's partially because we've been told that we just have to be like men, and again, not good men. So yeah, it's a huge problem. I think if we could just get rid of feminism, I think we would be so much further ahead than where we are at this point in the culture.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. You probably understand this better than anybody. So what is your remedy for us? What is the way out of feminism today?
Yeah, well, the first thing is we have to get it out of our church. We need to stop trying to make it work. I think John Paul II had this fabulous model of where he speaks about the beauty of woman in that encyclical Mulieris Dignitatem. He never uses the word feminism once. And part of the problem in the U.S. church is that there are many women who took that document and took his work and then try to add first wave feminism to it. And it's really a corrupting of John Paul's vision and just a corrupting of women in general. And that's probably the first place we need to start, is to get that out of our apostolates and universities and all the conservative circles that have been buying into that. The next thing we really have to do is look at the way in which women have been manipulated through our emotions. I think this is a really important idea that we have this sense that we can change things abstractly or far away from ourselves. So there's this model of, you can imagine the woman that works for PETA, but that she's aborted her own child. We have to get back to this understanding of woman in a very local context, that we're made to house children in our body. That giving birth to a child is the womb is the first home of the child. We have arms to embrace those, to care for those. That's really where God is going to start with a woman and her heart, is in the local, in those who are around us. Instead of really, thinking that somehow we're going to help people halfway around the world that we're never going to meet, and then actually aren't making significant sacrificial demands on us. I think this is another important element of learning how to love others, is recognizing the sacrifices that are going to be built into when you love people well. So I think that's another practical aspect, is just starting with what's local, and instead of trying to have some sort of abstract idea of saving the world or changing the world that doesn't really have anything tangible or close to us. So I think those are important. I think there's also a huge amount of work that we could do just informing our moral imaginations about, first of all, what authentic womanhood is, which includes motherhood, whether it's spiritual, psychological, or biological. But also a lot of work needs to be done about what ordered manhood is, fatherhood, the masculine virtues. And I think this is one of the areas that I loved researching the most for my book, was really looking at what it is that men bring to the relationship, to the family, to the children. And one of the ideas that sticks out most is the role that fathers play in forming their children. If there's a matriarchy, the society ends up being kind of ghettoized. And part of that is because there aren't men there to help the children order their lives. So a man, through his fatherhood, is the one that says, okay, this child needs to be pushed out of the home, or pushed out of the nest, so to speak, because this is where his or her gifts are. Or he can also say, these are special gifts that you have that need to be protected and cared for, especially our sexuality. So those are the incredible gifts that men have as well. So I think just talking about these things and having a conversation about what these things are authentically, instead of kind of getting trapped in this Marxist women are victims and men need to keep apologizing to them kind of cycle, will go a long way in terms of restoring just our relationships and understanding what it is that God is calling each of us to do, both on a level of male or female, but also on a uniquely individual level. What's the way that he's calling us as unique persons, in our daily lives and roles and in his mission for us?
Yeah, as Pope St. John Paul II used to say, used to call us on, become who you are, right? So to become how we are made to be, and we're made to put Christ at the center. We are made to be men and women of virtue, and to really be living out the gospel that Jesus came and died to reveal to us. Through his Catholic Church, handed on to us authoritatively. We've got the faith, we've got the morals, we've got the plan. We just really need to humbly receive it and be faithful to it. I think Bishop Sheen had some interesting remarks here that I want to play. You actually cite this quote. It's another version of it from his book, The World's First Love, in your book in chapter 3. But here he is. We'll get to see him here a little bit for those that are watching on video today, but we'll get to hear his voice by audio, that those who are listening. But this is from his show Life is Worth Living, originally broadcast here, this clip from 1953. Here it is.
The level of any civilization is always the level of its womanhood. And the reason is, when we know something, we always bring it down to our own level. That is why we have to explain things to children, by bringing it down to the level of their minds. But when we love something, we always have to go out to meet it. For example, if we love music, we have to meet the demands of music. If we study a foreign language, we have to follow its laws. Even if we study ping pong, we have to meet its requirements too. Now, inasmuch as woman is loved, it follows that the nobler a woman is, the nobler a man will have to be deserving of that love. That is why the level of any civilization is always the level of its womanhood.
All right, there's Venerable Bishop Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Fulton Sheen, soon to be Blessed Fulton Sheen, likely soon to be Saint Fulton Sheen, but there he is. Interesting remarks. Dr. Gress, what do you think of when you hear those remarks?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a huge Fulton Sheen fan, and I think that's one of his best quotes. And there's a lot of them from which to choose, I think. But yeah, I think he's really on to something there in terms of just reminding women that what a gift that they have, and to really start coming into the maturity of what their womanhood is. I think one of the things that you can see in our culture is the way in which women mimic men on a social level. I know this was my own experience when I started working on my PhD in philosophy, because there are very few women, and it was just very easy to sort of pick up the habits and behaviors of those around me. And I think that a lot of women do this, whether they're in law or medicine or different disciplines. And the problem is that you get stuck there. You end up never actually maturing into the woman that God created you to be, because you're so busy mimicking those around you in a way that actually doesn't properly integrate your femininity. So I think it's also just a great reminder to young women too, because it feels like there's all this pressure to sort of almost among college students to, who could be sort of the worst or behave worse or, come across in a way that's very deeply unconcerned about cultural mores or morality and whatnot. And so instead of that, just being this, having this incredible reminder that what we really want is going to be attained when we actually become much more like what we want. We're going to attract that which is like us. And so I think that Fulton Sheen's words are obviously timeless, but such a great reminder of the importance of actually, like you said, becoming who it is that we're meant to be. And then those other pieces follow, whether it's in a spouse or some other kind of vocation. That's really where the beauty and the fruit is going to be found, instead of, trying to continually debase ourselves for some other cultural goal or trend.
Absolutely. Dr. Carrie Gress is with us again. Her book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, sophiainstitute.com. We've got one more segment to go, so stay tuned. But, it just strikes me that the reality is so beautiful of what we're called to, what we're made for, to really hold up the vision of that. So it is so sad that it's not being held up very often, and to hold up great examples of that as well. But you even, just think about abortion as an example. Such a terrible thing, but what is the opposite vision, right? The mom may be in very difficult circumstances, but keeping her heart turned towards her child, loving her child, even in the difficulty. And then the father having his heart turned toward the mom, toward the child. How beautiful, again, might be very difficult. Then the community, their hearts turned towards that family, helping them. This is a beautiful vision, what we're called to, the vision of authentic love. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Dr. Carrie Gress, talking about her book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity. Highly recommend it. Make sure you get this book and pass it along as well. sophiainstitute.com. You can also go to Carrie Gress's website, carriegress.com. And Dr. Gress, I just want to go to, I do want to give you the floor to speak to anything else you want to share with us today, but one last thing to prompt you with first, and that is from the final chapter, Restoring What Has Been Lost. And I just think this is so important for everyone to see. You first have this quote here, protective parenting once meant caring about who your daughter dated. And this is in referring to fathers here, the decisions she made and guiding her in a good direction. Now it just means preventing injury. And so children today are deprived of the most fundamental protection, the passing down of morals, principles, and a framework for life. You go on to write, without fathers performing this role, we have girls making major life decisions without guidance. We have girls selling themselves to strangers. We have fathers putting their daughters on public display. And I keep seeing all these stories online lately of young women sharing situations they got into of such hurt and heartbreak, and it's hard not to think they needed more direction. They needed adults. Children today, as always, need a moral guide and clear boundaries. Otherwise, they end up trying to invent their own or embracing those the world might happen to provide. The evidence of this continues to mount. Its results are predictable and devastating. These are the stakes of men not stepping up and being the virtuous fathers that they are called to. And who pays the price? Well, there's a consequence for those men for sure. But there's also the terrible consequences of those who are entrusted to their care and them not stepping up and living these virtues and living their vocation as they're called to. All of us are going to be imperfect, but there is a certain standard here that men do need to be held to, fathers need to be held to, and it is important to I think to raise it up and to see it and to call fathers on. So thank you for writing that, and again, thank you for the book. But I want to give you the floor to share anything else that you wish to share with us today.
Yeah, no, I thank you for bringing that up. I think that's the real beauty, is that a lot of times men feel like we don't really have a purpose. And this is what feminism has stolen from men. In fact, I did a women's conference not too long ago, and I had one woman come up to me afterwards, and she said, I need to go home and apologize to my husband because I've taken over every kind of responsibility that should and ought to have fallen on him, and just taken care of everything. And I think women feel like this is something that they have to do, not really realizing that men are given different graces than women are. We have we're really responsible for giving life, and they're responsible for protecting life. And I think the ways in which we've shirked these is obviously something that we can see deeply in the culture. And this is why we have so many problems with young women. We're actually seeing young women who do not actually have the capacity to feel empathy for their own children. Some of that has to do with the fact that they just never grew up, or they never had anyone require them to actually behave in a way that was serving others. The other thing that I think that we see in spades, especially in the news cycle, is just the fact that because we don't have any morals, women gravitate in particular towards this idea of who's the biggest victim. And this is a really important way in which the culture is sort of signaling where we need to put our attention and our efforts, is in this concept of victimhood. And that's something that is it's totally unheard of historically, this really prioritizing the victim. And you can kind of see it based on what the flags are, what the framing is on social media, or bumper stickers, those kinds of things. We've fallen into the sort of bumper sticker morality, and that's got to be, again, some gift that parents give their children, is something sturdier than who's the biggest victim. Getting back to basic principles like the 10 Commandments, and of course what our church offers us, which is so much richer and deeper. And I think I'd love to just close on that idea. Is we've got these incredible models of womanhood, both in the Virgin Mary, and of course in the witness of all these female saints throughout the ages. We also have incredible writing about womanhood, but we also have this great model in the church itself as the bride of Christ, as the church building even. And we can see that, these are not social constructs. Womanhood is not a social construct. It's deeply embedded into our understanding of the church as Christ the bridegroom, and the church is the bride in the Blessed Virgin Mary and the virgin birth. All of these kinds of elements point to something that's so much bigger than we are, and that we can really use to help meditate on, but also form our own understanding of who it is that God calls us to be. And it's so much greater than what the world tells us that we're meant to be. So much more satisfying, so much more beautiful and compelling. And I think that's what people really want back in their lives again, is something that's meaningful and purposeful. And certainly this is what Christ offers us through his church and in our lives as women.
Yes, yeah, thanks be to God. And since we have a few more minutes, I did see this question. I think Sophia Institute Press sent this along, and it's one that I'm not actually even entirely sure what it means, but I find it is fascinating to me. I'd love to hear your response to it. And the question is this: what do you think will be gained by dropping dependence upon the feminist brand?
Yeah, well, I think, if we're not using that term anymore, suddenly there's a whole new language that comes into talking about womanhood. Feminism has sort of loaded in it, like this, like I've said before, this idea of victimhood. But if we're suddenly talking about women and without that baggage, without all 200 years of anti-Christian, really anti-woman, anti-male propaganda, then I think that's when you can start having conversations again. Language can start meaning something again. It's not all this shorthand that we've come to understand through feminism. So I think that's something that is exciting to consider, because we also then have to start using language like motherhood and understanding that this is what defines women is motherhood. This isn't just something that's for biological mothers, but that it's for all women to have some kind of care and nurturing for those around them. Again, back to the idea of what it means to be a man, and being male and female being in a complementary relationship with one another. And then, of course, just the beauty of children. Getting back to this language of understanding the way in which our relationships are meant to mimic the Trinity that John Paul II talked about so richly. So I think what happens is you're forced to, without the shorthand of feminism, speak in a way that's much clearer and that actually has the capacity to move beyond the ideology in a way that we've been just stymied by for 100 years now.
Yes, excellent. Again, the book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, sophiainstitute.com, sophiainstitute.com. You can also learn more about Dr. Carrie Gress and her good work and all of her books over at her website, carriegress.com. All right, finally, I guess then just to finish up with one word that I think we don't want to get rid of, and that's a word that the feminists wanted to get rid of and really oppose directly from the beginning, and that is patriarchy, which really we're just talking about fatherhood and hierarchy, and that's something in the church that is meant to serve, and it's completely different than the negative association that feminists have tried to saddle it with. Anything that you want to say just about redeeming that word patriarchy and encouraging a virtuous patriarchy?
Yeah, no, I think it's really an important point to just understand that is the boogeyman. That's where it all started. And, so many people have this negative connotation, their understanding of patriarchy. They think of it as something very oppressive and awful. And it's actually really just references hierarchy, which the hierarchy in the church is really at the top of that is Christ. And then, of course, we have the Pope. So it's a bit, confusing for even Catholic feminists to say that they are against the patriarchy when we know it's actually the divine order of the world. But this is the way in which men's minds work, the way they gift us with order and organization. And I think this is another great area that when you start looking at what it really is, it's very surprising and becomes very compelling instead of just relying upon the same old propaganda that we've been hearing about it being something terrible for so long.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Carrie Gress. It's outstanding work. Again, the book, Something Wicked, Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, sophiainstitute.com. And it's just exciting to have this work getting out there, educating, forming people, their intellect, their will, and the good fruits that are going to come from this. Thanks be to God. God bless you all.